Hey everybody, this is Noah Patton with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and welcome to our presentation, Hurricane Maria, Where Are We 2 Years Later? This will be an overview of Puerto Rico's recovery efforts, as well as a review of events marking the upcoming second anniversary of Hurricane Maria. Now to start it off, actually we're going to just give everybody a minute just to hop on the line, and then we will circle right back. So, thanks.
Okay, good morning, everybody. This is Untell. I'm President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Thank you so much for joining this morning to remember Hurricane Maria and talk about where we are 2 years later and all of the work and changes that we need to see happen in order for Puerto Rico to achieve an equitable and complete recovery. So at the National Low Income Housing Coalition, 2 years ago, after Hurricane Harvey, we pulled together a group of advocates and practitioner-impacted people from Houston and at the national level to talk about disaster recovery in Houston. Then after Hurricane Maria, that coalition grew. It grew further after the wildfires in California, in Hurricanes Florence, Hurricane Irma, Hurricane Michael, and now it is what we call the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition, which is a coalition of over 800 organizations across the country, many of them from impacted communities, who are working together towards an equitable and complete disaster housing recovery for disaster victims. So Hurricane Maria, as many of you know, and I should also say that there is a Puerto Rico working group of the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition that was created after Hurricane Maria in order to focus specifically on issues related to Puerto Rican recovery. So Hurricane Maria, as many of you know, devastated Puerto Rico, and the island is still recovering. But the failures by the Trump administration have been slowing progress, leaving thousands of these American citizens without the assistance that they need. In September of 2017, Hurricane Maria devastated Puerto Rico and the Caribbean just 2 weeks after being hit by Hurricane Irma. And it was the worst disaster to strike the islands since records have been kept. More than 3,000 people lost their lives in storm-related deaths. More than 300,000 homes were damaged or destroyed, and more than $90 billion in damage was done to the island. The storm only exacerbated the existing poverty and inequity that existed before the disaster. 45% of the territory's population lived in poverty, more than triple the 15% national average. 3 out of 4 of the lowest income families paid more than 30% of their income on housing. And the existing housing stock before the disaster was often in poor condition, with more than 110,000 homes lacking basic kitchens and plumbing. So there was, and there certainly still remains, a lot of work to do to rebuild Puerto Rico. And unfortunately, their failures and delays by the Trump administration slowed down any attempts at progress. Puerto Ricans were denied assistance by FEMA at twice the rate of hurricane survivors in Texas and Florida after Hurricane Harvey and Irma. More than 70,000 Puerto Ricans were wrongfully denied assistance by FEMA because the agency refused to acknowledge local land ownership practices. FEMA continues to block solutions that would allow more survivors to get the help they're eligible for. FEMA also failed to address the housing needs of survivors who were displaced to the United States, to the states here, the continental U.S. Thank you. FEMA refused to activate proven solutions like the Disaster Housing Assistance Program to help survivors afford stable homes while they got back on their feet. And instead, FEMA relied on its motel program, which many Puerto Ricans could not access. And then they abruptly terminated the program, leaving survivors without any options. As a result, as a direct result of FEMA's action, homelessness rates increased by double digits in places where Puerto Rican survivors were displaced to. More recently, HUD and the Trump administration have done everything they can to prevent federal dollars that have been approved by Congress from reaching Puerto Rico. In February 2018, 19 months ago, Congress approved $16 billion in mitigation funds for Puerto Rico. Because of delays in HUD getting the money out to Puerto Rico, Congress directed HUD to release the funds within 90 days, a statutory deadline that HUD missed last week. At the same time, HUD has released mitigation dollars for other impacted communities in the continental U.S., leaving only Puerto Rico isolated from the resources that it needs. And moreover, the long-term rebuilding process overseen by HUD has not only been too slow, but it could pose greater risks for Puerto Ricans, including widespread displacement of low-income communities. Those risks could be mitigated if HUD and the Housing Department in Puerto Rico encouraged more robust public participation. So I'm going to turn it over now to Paul Keeley, our Chief Operating Officer here at the Coalition, to introduce our other speakers for today's call. Paul?
Great. Okay. Thanks, Diane. And hello, everybody. So on today's call, we'll hear from advocates working in Puerto Rico and in D.C. about the state of the recovery in Puerto Rico and the ongoing challenges as we approach the second anniversary of Hurricane Maria. We'll also give a preview of some of the events planned in D.C. to mark this milestone. The speakers, I'll just run through who they are first, and then we'll introduce each by turn. We will have Edith Garcia, PhD, AICP, and Planners for Puerto Rico member, who will speak about the lack of public participation in recovery efforts so far, as well as the importance of that participation to the Puerto Rico recovery. We'll also have Glen Spigen, Red de Fundación de Puerto Rico, Executive Director. Glen will speak about the very slow pace of recovery funding and what kind of damage that has been doing to Puerto Rico's recovery and its ability to respond to future storms. Next, we will hear from David Carrasquillo from the Hispanic Federation, Puerto Rico Planning and Community Development Manager, and David will talk about the potential for displacement of vulnerable disaster survivors during the Puerto Rico recovery process. Then we'll be joined by Adi Martinez, founder of Furia, who will speak on the various legislative issues that the Disaster Housing Recovery Coalition has been focusing on, including pushing for greater civil society involvement, the Espaillat-Warren bill, the Reforming Disaster Recovery Act, and pushing for the release of Community Development Block Grant disaster recovery funding. Finally, we'll be joined by Laura Esquivel from the Hispanic Federation, the National Advocacy Director there, who will go over the events the Hispanic Federation has planned for the following week to mark the second anniversary of Hurricane Maria. Okay, so first, let's go ahead and get started with Edith Garcia. Edith, if you're on the line, go ahead.
Oh, yes, I'm here. Thank you so much, Noah. So I would like to talk about specifically the mitigation plans and the public participation process. Planners for Puerto Rico, which is a collaboration between academic and practicing planners in Puerto Rico and in the United States, actually have been working with the Sociedad Puertorriqueña de Planificación, and I'm glad that David Carrasquillo is also in the call. So we have been watching the mitigation plans and what is happening in terms of participation. So to give a little bit of background, on August 31st, This is of 2018. FEMA authorized a budget of about $3.1 million, and the Puerto Rico Planning Board was given the task of to update all the mitigation plans for the 78 municipalities. So they issue a RFP, and then Atkins and Caribe LLP, which is a foreign company, was going to update and create the plans. There was another company that was also looking at Cadiz Caribe, another foreign company looking at 12 other municipalities to do the mitigation plans. So earlier this year, in January, with Atkins Caribe, with the HMO and FEMA, began this process of carrying out public outreach for the first group of municipalities, which were 12 municipalities, not all of the 78 municipalities. So the RFP for the contract, it said that Atkins, along with the municipality, specifically, there was a mitigation plan committee that it was put together. They will have 4 meetings to put together the mitigation plans, but they actually did not include broad citizen participation for the general public. And the Puerto Rican Planning Society, they have been very engaged in these processes, and the RFP itself said that citizen participation was needed, but it was not really achieved. And so in terms of the local mitigation plans, it really states, and this is on 44 CFR section 2.6b, that involvement process is very, very important, and it's this is how you can ensure that you can have an effective plan. And of course, it's an opportunity for the public to comment on these plans when there's in a draft stage, right before they are actually approved. And we also know that the plans themselves are tied to funding, so that's very important, because a lot of community groups have projects that they have been working on, and they depend on this funding for carry out this the mitigation plans themselves. But again, they haven't been involved in the process. And so some of the suggestions that we had, it was to create a coalition of community leaders and government, private and third sector organizations to design a more effective participation process for the next group of municipalities. So as I said before, these municipalities are in Valle. So right now there's Vieques, Comerío, Salinas, and right now these meetings are happening. So there's groups, for example, with the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, that are putting together some a guide for mitigation, so community leaders and nonprofit organizations understand how to get involved. There's this series of webinars and also training for that already passed the letter of intent for the mitigation funding. But there have been some mobilization to try to get people to participate in these meetings. But of course, more is needed from the planning board to actually, because they're the ones in charge of these, to include a more broad public participation, which is required by FEMA. And by the federal government, including HUD, and as well as other things, of course, of making meetings more accessible in convenient times, and so on. So that's all I wanted to say. Thanks.
Bueno, thank you, Edith. I was about to start speaking to you in Spanish. Thank you for that presentation. We'll now turn to Glen Spigen from the Red de Fundación de Puerto Rico. Glenice, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, go right
Awesome.
ahead.
Thank you, Paul. Happy Thursday, everybody. So as mentioned, my name is Glen Spigen. I'm the Executive Director of La Red de Fundaciones de Puerto Rico, which in English would be the Funders Network. Our purpose is really to strengthen the impact of philanthropy in Puerto Rico and for Puerto Rico. So we look at expanding its reach and in aligning these efforts amongst, the philanthropic sector and among other sectors like the private and especially the public sector in this case. So if we talk more about slow recovery and how this impacts, and I'll talk a little bit more specific in how this impacts the philanthropic sector, I guess. And as you heard from Diane and all the data and the reality of where we are and the impact that this has, we need to acknowledge that this slow recovery brings a lot of uncertainty, into everything that we do. So for us, it's a big challenge in aligning these efforts of philanthropy and in aligning them with the public sector. It's an even more challenge. And to support the people and the organizations that advocate for this just recovery and that either, they do efforts in public participation or in legislation or giving direct services for the recovery. So we're always advocating for them. So for us, it's a bigger challenge in attracting this more specific non-Puerto Rico philanthropy to invest in Puerto Rico due to this uncertainty, due to how it's been so politicized. It is more difficult to align these efforts. It's more difficult to attract these philanthropists to continue to stay in Puerto Rico, not only for the disaster, but more in a more strategic position. So for us, this is the biggest challenge, and we will continue to support and advocate for all the nonprofits that have been deeply involved since day one and that still fight day to day for a recovery that is just and have that real lens of thinking of vulnerable communities and people that really need it, just a recovery, not just a recovery for a few. So we focus very much on bringing funders together in different themes, housing being one of them, which is very important, and to show them that the needs that we have and the challenges that we have and the organizations that they can support that are doing great things in Puerto Rico, and to speed, to have a recovery that is, based on justice and equality. So it is very important for us to speed this up and to come together and ask for things to be more simple and to really support each other in this moment. I'll leave it for questions after this.
Great. Thank you, Glenice.
Sure.
Okay, we'll now turn to David Carrasquillo from the Hispanic Federation. David, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Oh, great.
Okay, we're going to be talking about on displacement. Our general statement or argument is that the policies that have been enacted after the aftermath of Maria have been merged with other federal and state policies, and as a result, displacement has become a more aggressive and real threat to communities. Regarding flood mapping,
Hey, David,
Yes.
Can I interrupt you for just a second? If you are on speakerphone, it's a little bit challenging to hear you. Is it possible for you to pick up the phone and do it directly?
Can you hear me better now?
It'll be fine. I guess there's a little bit of an echo, but I guess it'll be okay. Go ahead.
Okay. So we're making the argument that the policies that have been enacted in the aftermath of Maria have been merging with other federal and state policies, and as a result, displacement has become a more aggressive and real threat to communities. Regarding flood mapping, the new updates of the flood zones, known as the advisory maps, do not include in their modeling flood management infrastructure that is already in place that is not certified by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, including channels constructed decades ago, other additional infrastructure like contention walls, drainage, ditches, gutters, and levees are not being considered. Regarding mitigation availability, not only many communities have been systematically denied assistance by the federal agencies, but also mitigation projects have not been a real option for them, even when the money is there. The planning processes and timelines to update the risk mitigation plans in each municipality are not in total misalignment with the state's due dates for the presentation of mitigation projects that happened last week. The miscoordination amongst agencies produces a massive knockout of public participation in the decision-making processes of which communities will be considered for mitigation or fund allocation. Tenancy has become a real issue because assistance denials based on the lack of proof of ownership were wrongly evaluated by FEMA and created conditions of greater uncertainty for affected survivors. FEMA, even after recognizing this mistake and adopting a alternative appeal form, the agency failed on advertising it, failed on contacting people that were incorrectly informed, and failed in reopening their cases. Now, in a context of a high presence of investors because of Act 20 and 22 and because of the Opportunity Zone law and because of the amendments to the zoning map presented by the Puerto Rico Planning Board, the policies of vertically families without a moratorium of construction, the initiatives for offering titles and deeds are tainted with mistrust and fear of possible buyouts. As a direct result of Maria, thousands of families fled to the U.S., especially to Florida, Connecticut, and New York, as climate and economic refugees. After temporal subsidies for housing ended, there has been no follow-up on the conditions of this population, and no data from them can be found. Regarding the action plan programs, the action plan has never included 3 key pieces of information that, based on the Congress's local allocation notices, should drive the design of programs and fund distribution. I'm talking about, first, the unmet needs, second, the most affected information, and third, a damage assessment. This information that should be public should guarantee the allocation of money to the communities and populations that need it most. Without it, there is no way to be accountable for the decision-making on how priorities are being defined and which projects are funded. HUD already denied one program which proposed a bailout for banks in the form of $40 million for outstanding due payments on mortgages. That same plan in another program creates a voucher system that promotes getting into debt by acquiring new mortgages. This, in a context where the amount of foreclosure homes has spiked significantly in a very scary way, is a problem. The plan also overlooks the need for retrofitting abandoned housing units around the island. Census data identify over 350,000 vacant units, which over 75,000 is in advanced stage of abandonment. And 2 years in, we still have over 35,000 blue roofs where the current rehabilitation, reconstruction, and relocation program known as R3 isn't a real option for them. Regarding zoning and with that, the new amendments to the zoning presented by the Puerto Rico Planning Board systematically and artificially increase the value of land and properties in Puerto Rico. It also augments the development possibilities and construction capabilities of investors. These measures will hike property tax in Puerto Rico, as well as snowballing up the cost of life in Puerto Rico in general. These amendments are just another policy enacted in order to transfer capital from the pockets of locals towards bondholders of a debt that has not been audited and its legality has been called into question. In conclusion, the policies that have been put into place perceive land as Puerto Rico's biggest asset to peddle with and perceive people as in the way of making huge transactions. The agenda of austerity has taken over the recovery process, promoting displacement. A big shift on logic behind these decisions is needed. We need a logic more responsive to people's needs and aspirations, and not on how to pay an illegal debt. That's all.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much. Okay, now we'll turn to Adi Martinez, the founder of Furia Inc., and I failed to mention previously a senior policy analyst at Oxfam. Adi, take it away.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Good. So I've been working with Oxfam for 3 months now as senior policy analyst, but Oxfam has been in Puerto Rico for 2 years after the hurricane, October 2017. And we have worked directly with organizations and there are partners of Oxfam and other collaborators on the recovery efforts, through which we confirm everything that our partners in this call have mentioned. We have found that the agencies in charge of recovery in Puerto Rico have kept their process hyper-centralized, not taking advantage of the local community's historical and institutional knowledge. As Edith mentioned, most communities in Puerto Rico have been excluded from playing any role in program design and implementation, undermining effective planning, execution, and oversight of the processes. And moreover, federal government now has increased centralized control over recovery efforts, with FEMA instituting a drawdown process and HUD announcing the imposition of a financial monitor. We believe that these measures do not address the key challenges faced by the most vulnerable Puerto Ricans, nor do they ensure transparency, accountability, or resiliency for the most vulnerable Puerto Ricans. This has been confirmed also as a founder of Furia Puerto Rico, a local non-for-profit in which community leaders are working to activate themselves and organize their needs and work on advocacy initiatives. This has been confirmed by them. In March 2019, over 500 community leaders participated in a community summit. They demanded to the government that their homes, streets, and infrastructure is still a wreck, that recovery has to be sped up, that they needed to be able to work community resiliency centers within their communities, and also they demanded for a work group or a committee to be created to supervise recovery efforts, and that it would include the presence of community leaders. So the Puerto Rico Working Group of the National Low Income Housing Coalition have been working to support these efforts, these asks. We are calling for Congress to move forward with the promotion of the creation of a civil society work group or task force that would be essential as a mechanism for transparency and accountability for Puerto Rico. Also, we are requiring urgent action to expedite the obligation of recovery funds that are being held up by federal agencies, as was explained in the beginning of this call. And of course, we are advocating for rapid consideration and approval of HR 4557 S2301, the Reforming Disasters Recovery Act, which would solve the informality or the lack of regulation of the CDBG-DR program by permanently authorizing the program and establishing important safeguards and tools to help ensure that federal disaster recovery efforts reach the households where the resources are most needed, which is not happening. There are many challenges for that to happen now. Also, we are moving to advocate for the approval of HR 5474 S2996, the Housing Victims of Major Disaster Act. And this act would address the problems that that have been faced on eligibility for FEMA individual household program by clearly defining eligibility and enumerating what must be accepted by FEMA as proof of occupancy and ownership, as it is defined under the Stafford Act. It would also require FEMA to create and distribute a standard form statement to self-certify occupancy and ownership, and permitting also disaster survivors from 2017 or 2018 to have a window to be able to appeal determinations against them. This is a summary, so I'm available for questions after the call.
Great, thanks, Adi. Okay, our final speaker is Laura Esquivel from the Hispanic Federation. Laura, are you there?
I am here. Good morning, everybody. My name is Audra Saddam. I'm Director of National Advocacy for Hispanic Federation. For those of you that don't know, Hispanic Federation is one of, if not the largest institutional funder on the island of Puerto Rico, investing in post-Irma and Maria recovery and rebuilding. We are seeding over 110 community-based organizations and initiatives on the island, working across all areas of housing, displacement, agriculture, mental health, environmental issues, clean water, etc. We're also very active in DC on federal advocacy issues on behalf of Puerto Rico, leading and participating in many coalition efforts, as well as our own direct advocacy. Next week, Hispanic Federation is organizing a large Hill Day, a large lobby day on Capitol Hill, bringing over 100 participants from 12 states, as well as Puerto Rico. We have about 60 meetings scheduled with members of Congress. Our goals, our asks are to insist on a democratization of the recovery process. We saw that the best way to end corruption is to have the people be involved and to participate in the process. And we are demanding a greater role for people in deciding their own fate. We believe very strongly that a just recovery for Puerto Rico needs to be in the hands of Puerto Ricans. We will not let members of Congress have the false belief that because they don't represent Puerto Rico, that they don't represent Puerto Ricans, and that many people in their districts and states who they do represent care about Puerto Rico and expect their representatives to as well. We're also calling on for an end to the stonewalling of disaster funds that are needed to recover. That's going to be on September 18th. We're also having a press conference at noon that day on the Capitol Triangle with impacted people who will talk about what life is like still in Puerto Rico 2 years after the hurricanes hit, with Congress members Velasquez, Edith Garcia, I believe Senator Martinez will be attending. And, you know, we really, maybe we can send out the advisory to people who participated on this call. That's a little bit of what we're doing, but I also want to, you know, explain that there is a broad unity and a range of activities being planned next week on the 2-year mark that show how active and strong the sentiment is across the country, and to show that we will not let this country forget about Puerto Rico, the people there and their needs. On September 18th, Power for Puerto Rico is having a congressional briefing that will look at how the decisions of the FOMB are not economically viable, the need for an independent audit of the Puerto Rican debt, which was mentioned on this call. That is something we are all insisting on and in unity about. The just recovery cannot happen on the island if the priority is repaying the debt. So auditing the debt to determine what debt was obligated illegally and dismissing that so that the people of Puerto Rico are not paying for that instead of paying to rebuild their island is something that is very important to everybody who cares about Puerto Rico. On September 20th, 9:20 in respective time zones, Power for Puerto Rico is organizing a moment of silence. September 21st in Philadelphia at Philadelphia City Hall. At 10 a.m., they will be unfurling this massive 60 by 40 foot Puerto Rican flag and doing a march to commemorate the lives lost. The website for that is thepeopleforpuertorico.org. September 20th, Oxfam is doing a congressional briefing to talk more about what Audie discussed today for civil society oversight. The list goes on, but I just wanted to give you a sense of the range of activities and unity, across the country, not just by Hispanic Federation, but by our allies and coalition partners. And I'm happy to send follow-up information about any of these activities websites that you can visit. Hispanic Federation's website for our advocacy issues on Puerto Rico is takeaction4pr.org. Take action and then the number 4 PR. So much.
Okay, Laura, thank you very much. So what we are going to do in the interest of time and efficiency is share with you. First of all, let me just thank Edith, Glenice, David, Adi, and Laura one more time for all they shared. We have a slide up now for if there's anyone on the call that would like to follow up with any of the speakers and with Sarah Saddam Michelson here at the National Low Income Housing Coalition. All of the speakers and Sarah's contact emails are listed on this slide, so take a moment to jot those down and feel free to reach out to any of the speakers with follow-up questions you might have. I'm sure that they could share a phone number with you if you reached out first by email, if you wanted to have further conversation with them about anything they've presented today. And I thank all of you for participating. Again, thank you to our speakers. And we will be following up with more information. Stay tuned. Thank you all.